Ma'am, if you call the sheriff over a private driveway dispute, you better be real sure whose land you're standing on. That was the last thing I said before the red and blue lights spilled across my gravel road like a storm rolling over dry Texas limestone. The crunch of cruiser tires on my private drive sounded wrong, like somebody dragging chains through a church. I remember the smell first, diesel exhaust from the deputies' SUVs mixing with cedar, and the faint scent of Claire's coffee drifting from the porch. Denise Whitmore stood beside the patrol cars in white capri pants and a pressed HOA polo, one hand clutching a clipboard, the other pointing at me like she'd finally cornered a criminal. Her smile had that brittle look people get when they think borrowed authority makes them untouchable. "That's him," she snapped to the deputies. "He's trespassing on restricted community property. My own property. 42 acres outside county limits, fenced by my grandfather in 1974. I tasted metal in my mouth from biting back a laugh. Because if you've ever dealt with someone who rules a cul-de-sac like a dictator, you know they don't start with handcuffs. They start with paperwork. Denise had spent 6 months trying to force us into her private HOA. Fake assessments. Threat letters. Security patrols crawling past our gate at dawn. Last week, she posted a notice claiming our road was now subject to community access oversight. Community access. To a ranch older than her subdivision. I told her no. Calm. Final. That word did something to her. Some people hear no as a boundary. Karen hears it as rebellion. The deputy stepped toward me, flashlight beam bouncing off the cattle gate chain. "Sir, we got a complaint." His radio hissed static. Somewhere behind me a wind chime tapped against the porch beam. Even the air felt charged. Denise folded her arms and gave me that suburban queen look, like she was already writing the violation notice in her head. What she didn't know was my wife had been silent for a reason. Claire stood on the porch in socks and an old denim jacket, saying nothing, watching everything. That's how she always looked when trouble walked onto our land, still as a judge, eyes doing calculations nobody else could see. I knew what was in the leather wallet tucked inside that jacket. Denise didn't. Yet. The deputy asked if we belonged to Willow Ridge Estates HOA. I told him we had refused membership because our deed predated the subdivision by decades. Denise cut in before I finished. "They're obstructing lawful community governance." Lawful. That word almost made me grin. Because there's fake power, and there's the kind printed on federal credentials. Denise had confused one for the other. She thought calling the cops would make us fold. She didn't realize every lie she'd filed, every false notice, every moved property marker had already become evidence. The smell of rain was coming in over the pasture. Somewhere cattle stirred. The younger deputy turned toward Claire. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to step down here." She moved then. Slow. Calm. One boot on the porch step. Then another. Denise's confidence swelled, mistaking calm for surrender. Big mistake. Claire reached into her jacket. Leather brushed denim. A wallet opened with a soft snap I can still hear. And in the wash of those patrol lights, when that federal shield caught blue and red reflections, Denise Whitmore's face drained white. Right there beside my gate. The woman who thought she ran the neighborhood looked like she'd just seen her kingdom catch fire. The deputy holding the flashlight did something I did not expect. He took one look at Claire's credentials, straightened his back, and lowered his voice. Even Denise noticed the shift. Power recognizes power long before words explain it. But to understand why that moment hit so hard, you need to know who Claire Mercer really is and why we ended up on that stretch of land in the first place. We bought the ranch for silence. Not metaphorical silence. Real silence. The kind where at dawn all you hear is mourning doves and wind moving through cedar breaks. 42 acres outside Austin, 2 ponds, one old cattle barn leaning like it had stories to tell, and a gravel road running half a mile from county blacktop to our gate. I grew up on land like this. My father used to say property lines are promises written into dirt. That stuck with me. After 20 years managing civil engineering projects, I wanted out of city politics, out of endless meetings, out of people who confused paperwork with wisdom. Claire wanted the same. At least that is what she told people. What she did not tell them was her work had taught her something dangerous about corruption. It rarely wears a villain's face. Usually it smiles over neighborhood potlucks and writes bylaws. The first week we moved in, Denise drove up in a white Lexus with gold HOA decals on the doors like she was county royalty. Tires crackling on our gravel. perfume drifting through the open truck window before she even stepped out. She carried a welcome packet thick as a mortgage file and smiled with all the warmth of a tax audit. Said Willow Ridge Estates had community standards, architectural controls, recreational assessments, mandatory dues. I told her our parcel was excluded from the subdivision. She laughed softly, looked around our land, and said everybody joins eventually. That sentence stayed with me. Everybody joins eventually. It was not hospitality. It was a threat wearing lipstick. Claire noticed it too. She always noticed what sat beneath words. We refused politely. Denise returned with survey maps. Then violation notices. Then letters claiming our private easement crossed community property. Every month a new fiction. I would find those envelopes clipped to our gate, fluttering in the Texas wind like little declarations of war. One accused our barn of lowering neighborhood values. Another claimed our cattle fencing violated visual harmony codes. Visual harmony. I still laugh at that one. But Claire never laughed. She collected every notice in a red file and labeled dates in neat black ink. Sometimes at night, I would hear papers turning while coffee cooled beside her. She was building something, though I did not yet see the shape. Denise mistook our patience for weakness. That is common with people who perform authority. They cannot imagine restraint as strategy. Then came the day she moved a boundary marker near our creek crossing. 3 feet, maybe 4. Small enough most people would miss it. Claire did not. She crouched beside that iron survey pin in the August heat, touched the disturbed soil, and said quietly, she just made a federal problem out of an HOA tantrum. I remember the cicadas screaming in the trees when she said it. The smell of hot dust rising off the road. That was the moment the story changed. Denise thought she was trying to absorb one stubborn property into her kingdom. She had no idea she had stepped into an investigation already taking shape while she was measuring mailbox paint. By the fall, Denise Whitmore had stopped pretending this was about neighborhood standards. It had become territorial. The kind of obsession people develop when someone refuses to kneel. Every escalation came dressed in procedure. That was her genius, if you can call it that. She never shouted in public. She weaponized forms. One Monday morning, I stepped outside to the smell of wet cedar after a storm and found orange stakes hammered along our roadside pasture. Utility markers. Not ours. I followed them half a mile to where contractors had tied ribbon around our gatepost. Community access expansion, according to the laminated notice zip tied to my fence. Denise had approved a proposed emergency access lane through our north field. Through our land. For the subdivision she claimed we would eventually join. I stood there with rain still dripping off the wire fence, tasting anger in the back of my throat. The audacity was almost artistic. When I drove to the county office, records showed no permit, no filed easement, no lawful authority, just a private HOA trying to create facts on the ground before anyone pushed back. Claire only nodded when I showed her the documents. Then she added a second folder inside the red file. Different tabs, different color labels. She was not reacting anymore. She was building a case. Denise sensed resistance and pushed harder. Patrol vehicles hired by the HOA started idling near our road at dawn. A private security man once stopped me at my own gate and asked whether I had authorization to use the route. I looked at his clipboard and nearly laughed. Another week, Denise mailed a lien threat over unpaid community assessments. We never owed $3,600 in fabricated fees. Her signature in blue ink at the bottom. Claire held the letter beneath a kitchen light, fingertips tracing the seal embossed on the paper. I remember bacon on the skillet, coffee perking, radio humming low with weather reports, and my wife saying, almost to herself, forged authority always leaves fingerprints. I should have known then Denise was walking into a trap she could not see. But the real turning point came at the autumn HOA meeting. Denise invited us publicly, claiming she wanted to resolve misunderstandings. I knew better. It was an ambush staged with folding chairs and bottled water. The clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Denise stood in front of 30 homeowners with a projection screen showing maps of what she called future integrated community parcels. Our ranch was highlighted in yellow, like conquered territory. She smiled and announced non-participating landowners created liability exposure for the neighborhood. Liability exposure. Then she suggested county intervention if voluntary compliance failed. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable. Others nodded because fear often wears agreement. I stayed quiet. Claire too. That bothered Denise more than argument ever could. Silence unsettles bullies. On the way out, an older resident slipped me a folded note in the parking lot. Her hands shook. She whispered Denise had been moving reserve funds through shell contractors for years. That note went into the red file. Another plant. Another thread. Then came the boundary marker incident Claire had warned about. Denise sent a landscaping crew that shifted survey stones near the creek crossing where an old federal drainage easement ran. Most people would have seen dirt disturbed and kept walking. Claire crouched beside the marker at sunset, dust on her jeans, gold light catching her face, and said they just crossed into federal jurisdiction. Her tone did not rise. It dropped. That was worse. Because when Claire grew quieter, consequences got louder. From that night on, she stopped merely documenting Denise. She started anticipating her. And Denise, drunk on borrowed power, kept making the same mistake every tyrant makes. She believed pressure creates surrender. She did not understand sometimes pressure reveals steel. After Denise moved that boundary marker, something shifted in Claire. She stopped reacting like a homeowner protecting property and started moving like someone reading a larger map. At first, I only noticed small things. She began taking early morning walks along the creek with a yellow survey notebook tucked under her arm. She photographed drainage culverts, recorded parcel markers, copied county plats, even measured the old access road shoulder with a steel tape while dew still clung to the grass. The smell of wet earth and diesel from distant ranch trucks mixed in the cold morning air while she built a pattern one quiet detail at a time. Denise, meanwhile, mistook our silence for retreat. That was when she weaponized the badge. First came county code enforcement, or what looked like it. A man in pressed khakis appeared at our gate with a laminated credential and a citation claiming our barn violated stormwater compliance. The paper looked official until Claire ran her thumb over the seal and said the county does not use this embossing. Fake. Denise had gone from bluffing to impersonating systems she did not understand. 2 days later, a sheriff deputy showed up over an anonymous complaint that our cattle fencing obstructed emergency response routes. Emergency routes through a private ranch road that dead-ended at our house. The deputy was decent enough, almost embarrassed, boots crunching gravel while he apologized for wasting our morning. But Denise was escalating by inches, the way floodwater rises before people notice danger. Then came the certified letter demanding we remove our front gate because it allegedly interfered with future subdivision evacuation planning. Future evacuation planning. For a development not authorized to touch our land. I remember holding that letter under the porch light at dusk while moths battered the bulb, and Claire simply said, "She keeps manufacturing jurisdiction." Every false claim she made was another brick in something bigger. Yet Denise could not stop. At Thanksgiving, she pushed further. The HOA sent a crew to place decorative stone monuments at the entrance where our private road met the county road. Brass plaques reading Willow Ridge Estates Grand Entry. They had literally branded our driveway as theirs. I drove home smelling fresh asphalt and saw those pillars glowing in headlights like somebody had planted trophies on my deed. My pulse hit my throat. But Claire only looked at the pillars and smiled the way chess players do when an opponent overextends. She said, "Do not touch them. Let them stand." That confused me. It made sense later. Because each illegal improvement increased exposure. Each invoice. Each contractor payment. Each unauthorized structure. More evidence. Denise thought she was building control. Claire saw a paper trail. The strangest part was how calm my wife stayed while pressure mounted. At night, she sat at the kitchen table under warm pendant lights, red file open, pages arranged in perfect stacks. Sometimes I woke at 2 in the morning hearing only pages turning and the old refrigerator humming. She was waiting. For what? I did not know. Then Denise made the move that exposed everything. She filed a petition with the county claiming our refusal to join the HOA constituted interference with regulated community governance and requested sheriff enforcement assistance. In plain English, she tried to use law enforcement to pressure us into a private contract. Even I knew that smelled rotten. Claire read the filing once and whispered she just crossed from nuisance into federal interest. That phrase landed heavy. Federal interest. Not problem. Interest. Like a door had quietly opened somewhere behind the visible story. Denise followed the filing with personal harassment. Patrol cars idled outside after dark. Anonymous complaints multiplied. A deputy even asked once if we had considered simply joining to resolve tensions. Denise believed pressure would wear us down. She never imagined we were letting her keep talking because every threat was being documented. Every false report. Every misuse of police contact. She thought she was summoning authority. She did not realize she was drawing a map straight to herself. The strange thing about letting a bully keep pushing is eventually they stop hiding what they are. Denise had crossed into that territory by winter. Every move she made grew bolder, sloppier, almost desperate. And Claire let it happen. That was the part one struggled with. I was raised to confront a fence when it leans, fix a gate when it sags, answer pressure with pressure. Claire believed in something colder. Documentation beats outrage. She said it so often it started sounding like a prayer. So we did not retaliate. We watched. We recorded. We let Denise keep digging. By December, the morning air smelled of mesquite smoke and frost, and our mailbox had become a delivery point for absurdity. Violation notices arrived twice a week. One accused our pond of unauthorized water retention affecting subdivision runoff aesthetics. I read that line 3 times and laughed out loud. Another claimed our mailbox style conflicted with neighborhood architectural consistency, even though we were not in the neighborhood. Denise was no longer enforcing fiction. She was drowning in it. Yet Claire filed every notice into the red folder. Tabs multiplied. Fraud, easement interference, misrepresentation, misuse of law enforcement contact. She was building a machine and Denise kept feeding it. Then the phone call started. Anonymous complaints to county offices. Reports of livestock hazards. Noise disturbances from a ranch with no machinery running after sunset. A deputy who had become quietly friendly admitted off record that repeated calls were all routing through the same complainant network tied to the HOA board. Claire did not react. She simply added a note. Pattern of coordinated harassment. Even her handwriting looked disciplined. Then came the security footage. Denise had hired a private patrol company, and one cold morning at 5:30 a truck rolled our road and parked by the creek crossing. Engine idling. Headlights off. The security guard stepped out with a clipboard and photographed our survey stakes. Through kitchen blinds, Claire watched while coffee steamed between us. She did not move until he left. Then she opened the red file and slid in a flash drive. I finally asked her what she was waiting for. She looked at me over her mug and said for Denise to believe she is winning. That answer sat with me all day, because it was true. Denise was growing reckless from success she only imagined. She sent a holiday letter to neighboring homeowners warning that non-compliant outside parcels threatened community safety. She was trying to turn residents into witnesses for a lie. But something unexpected happened. People started talking, quietly at first. A retired couple down the road brought over pecan pie and whispered Denise had pressured them into paying reserve fees for projects never built. Another neighbor passed me contractor invoices tied to the decorative stone pillars at our gate. Inflated invoices. Same shell vendor appearing 3 times. Claire barely blinked when she saw them. Just slid the papers into the red file beneath the folded note from the clubhouse. More threads tightening. Then came the moment I realized we were no longer just enduring Denise. We were baiting her. She mailed a final demand saying sheriff intervention would occur if we continued obstructing HOA jurisdiction. Bold letters. Official-sounding threats. She had put law enforcement into writing as leverage for a private dispute. Claire read the letter under the porch lamp while moth wings tapped glass and said quietly she just invited federal scrutiny. I asked if Denise knew that. Claire almost smiled. No, and she is about to call the police herself. That was the first time I understood the trap. We were not surviving pressure. We were shaping it. Denise thought every complaint weakened us. In truth, each complaint moved her closer to the moment at our gate when flashing lights would arrive. She would point at us with borrowed power and discover she had summoned the wrong authority. The deputy's flashlight beam lingered on Claire's credentials longer than it should have. His posture changed first, then his voice. Respect has a sound when fear is mixed into it. Soft. Careful. Ma'am, he said, almost under his breath. I was not aware this involved federal jurisdiction. Denise heard those words, and the color drained from her face so fast it looked unnatural under the patrol lights. For months, she had treated badges like props she could summon. In that instant, she realized some badges do not answer to neighborhood presidents. The night air smelled like damp cedar and radiator heat from idling cruisers. Gravel shifted under boots as the younger deputy stepped back from our gate and glanced at his partner, like both men suddenly understood they had walked into a different kind of call. Denise tried recovering with the brittle confidence of people who sense control slipping. She lifted her clipboard and began talking faster, throwing out phrases like trespass concerns and community safety enforcement, but her voice had changed. Less command, more panic wrapped in politeness. Claire did not raise hers at all. She simply asked the deputy if he had reviewed the complaint narrative submitted by the reporting party. He admitted he had only received dispatch notes. Claire nodded and from her jacket produced folded copies of the false HOA filings, the moved boundary surveys, the unauthorized easement notices. Pages from the red file. Dry paper whispering in the wind. Plant becoming payoff right there beside the cattle gate. Denise stared as if papers she had mailed to intimidate us had somehow come back sharpened. Then Claire said something I will never forget. Deputy, you are standing on land tied to a federally recorded drainage easement and responding to a private complainant who has repeatedly attempted to use law enforcement contact to coerce unlawful property control. She said it the way other people read grocery lists. Calm, precise, deadly in its simplicity. The older deputy took off his hat, rubbed his forehead, and looked at Denise as though seeing her for the first time. Ma'am, he said, did you report these folks as trespassers on property they own? No answer came. Only the hiss of a patrol radio and wind moving through live oaks. Denise finally tried smiling. That same brittle suburban smile. This is just a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings do not generate forged notices and fake county seals. Claire opened the red file farther and pulled out the folded note from the clubhouse. Contractor invoices tied to shell vendors, photographs of the illegally moved survey marker. The red file, the one Denise never knew was collecting her downfall. Then Claire spoke a sentence that changed the air around us. This matter is already under review. Under review. Not may be, not could be, is. Even the deputies went still. The younger one quietly walked back to his cruiser and turned off the spotlight, washing our gate in blue. Denise looked smaller without flashing lights backing her. For months, she had hidden behind systems she thought she controlled. Now those systems were stepping away from her. She made one last move, saying she would call her attorney, her board, county officials. Claire almost looked sorry for her. I would advise against making additional calls tonight. There was no threat in it. Somehow that made it heavier. Denise lowered the clipboard. Her knuckles had gone white around the edge. I remembered every false notice clipped to our gate, every security patrol, every smug phrase about everybody joins eventually. And there she stood frozen beside my gravel road, realizing she had spent months building evidence against herself. Then the older deputy asked Claire a question I had been waiting to hear. Ma'am, do you need us to remain while you initiate next steps? Denise heard that too. The police she had summoned were now asking my wife for instructions. The older deputy's question hung in the cold air like smoke. Do you need us to remain while you initiate next steps? I had spent months watching Denise Whitmore use uniforms as theater, and now the same authority she borrowed was waiting on Claire. That was the moment the axis shifted. Claire closed the red file halfway, not hurried, not dramatic, and asked the deputies to document the false trespass claim in their incident notes and preserve dispatch records connected to Denise's complaint history. Her tone never changed. Calm enough to lower blood pressure. Sharp enough to cut steel. Denise tried interrupting, saying this was neighborhood business, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But every word sounded smaller now. Like somebody arguing ownership after the deed has surfaced. The wind carried the smell of rain over the pasture, and somewhere a loose gate chain tapped metal in slow rhythm. Even the night seemed to pause. The younger deputy returned from his cruiser with a printout from dispatch. He quietly confirmed there had been repeated calls from Denise and other HOA board numbers over the past months involving our property. Repeated calls. Coordinated complaints. Claire asked if those dispatch logs could be retained. The deputy nodded. Another thread locked in place. Denise realized it too. Her eyes moved to the red file like it was alive. Then Claire opened it fully. I had seen those papers for months, but not assembled. Under patrol lights it looked like a ledger of slow justice. Fake county notices. Contractor invoices linked to the decorative gate monuments. Copies of altered plats. The folded note from the homeowner meeting. Even photos of the moved survey marker with federal easement references highlighted in yellow. Plant after plant returning. Denise had not been harassing two stubborn homeowners. She had been feeding an investigation. Claire removed a second folder from inside the red file, slimmer, darker, one I had never seen. This, she told the deputies, contains referrals already prepared regarding fraud exposure and coordinated misuse of public resources. Already prepared. Denise made a small sound in her throat, almost disbelief. You were investigating me? She asked. Claire looked at her with something colder than anger. No, Denise. We were documenting what you kept choosing to do. That landed harder than any accusation. Because blame can be argued. Choice cannot. Denise started talking quickly about rogue contractors, misunderstood assessments, unauthorized actions by the board treasurer. The unraveling had begun. People always try to shrink corruption into clerical error when the lights come on. Claire listened without expression. Then she asked the deputy whether he recognized the names on the contractor invoices. His face changed. One vendor was tied to a county procurement review already under scrutiny. That was the first time I saw Denise physically sway. Her kingdom had not just cracked. It connected to something larger. Claire stepped aside and made a brief phone call. No theatrics. Just low words into the dark. Case reference numbers. Property designation. Preservation request. When she ended the call, she said federal review had been elevated. Elevated. Another simple word with the weight of thunder. Denise whispered she needed to leave. The older deputy gently told her she should remain until notes were completed. The woman who once threatened liens over mailbox colors now stood waiting for permission to drive home. The irony almost made me smile. Before the deputies left, Claire asked one final thing. Have all responding units note the complainant initiated police contact in support of a disputed private enforcement action. They agreed. In plain English, Denise had just created an official record against herself by calling the cops. As patrol lights dimmed and the gravel road returned to darkness, Claire looked toward the decorative stone pillars Denise built at our entrance and said softly, tomorrow the red file opens all the way. I did not know what that meant then. By dawn I would. Dawn came cold and silver over the pasture, and the first sound I heard was tires on gravel again. Not one cruiser this time. Several. Slow, deliberate rolls crunching up the county road while mist hung over the creek crossing. I stepped onto the porch with coffee in hand and saw county vehicles, unmarked sedans, and two federal SUVs easing past the decorative stone pillars Denise had built like monuments to stolen authority. Those pillars looked different in morning light. Less grand. More evidence. Claire stood beside me already dressed, red file in hand, like she had been awake for hours. Maybe she had. The air smelled of wet limestone and diesel. Radios murmured. Doors shut with that heavy government thud. Then I understood what she meant when she said the red file opens all the way. This was not a warning phase anymore. This was consequence arriving on schedule. By 8 o'clock, the Willow Ridge clubhouse parking lot was full. Homeowners gathered in robes and work boots, coffee cups in hand, watching people with credentials move in and out carrying document boxes. No shouting. No spectacle. Real authority rarely performs. It inventories. The beauty of it was how quiet it looked. Denise arrived 20 minutes later in her white Lexus and stopped dead halfway across the lot. I could see from 50 yards away she understood before anyone spoke. Her kingdom was no longer hers. Claire walked past me carrying the red file and disappeared into the clubhouse. The same building where Denise once projected maps of our ranch as future community property. Plant returning again. I stood outside with a retired neighbor who had slipped me that folded note months before. He whispered he never thought he would see this day. Neither did I. Through open clubhouse doors I caught glimpses. Stacks of ledgers. Board minutes. Contractor records. Reserve accounts. The shell vendors from those inflated invoices. It was all surfacing. Denise tried speaking to one official near the entrance, waving papers, gesturing toward homeowners as if public performance could still save her. But nobody looked impressed. One investigator asked for original authorization records tied to the unauthorized entrance monuments and emergency access expansion proposal. Denise did not have them, because they never existed. By noon, the first real shock rippled through the neighborhood. Residents learned reserve funds had been routed through maintenance contracts tied to relatives of board members. Landscaping invoices doubled. Security patrol fees inflated. The fake empire had been financed by the very people Denise claimed to protect. Neighbors who once nodded at her from golf carts now stood in clusters whispering like parishioners after scandal. And then came the payoff I never saw coming. County crews removed the decorative stone pillars at our road entrance before sunset under Permit Correction Authority. I watched a loader lift the brass plaque reading Willow Ridge Estates Grand Entry and carry it away like a prop struck from a failed stage set. The same monument Denise planted to claim our road was gone in an hour. Plant. Payoff. Justice and machinery. But Claire was not done. That evening, an emergency HOA board meeting was called and dissolved before dark. Board members resigned. Temporary. Administration imposed. Denise walked out alone carrying a banker's box of personal files, face hollow, shoulders smaller somehow. The woman who once measured power in fines and threats now looked like someone who had just learned systems have memory. As sunset burned orange over the pasture, Claire returned home, set the red file on our kitchen table, and for the first time in months closed it. I asked if it was over. She poured coffee, looked out toward the road where the false HOA pillars had stood, and said almost, "Because tomorrow the gate comes down." Morning came bright and windless, the kind of Texas morning where even the gravel seems to hold its breath. I stepped onto the porch, and for the first time in months there were no security patrols crawling the county road, no violation envelopes clipped to the gate, no white Lexus circling like a shark. Just sunlight across pasture grass, and the low rustle of cattle moving near the creek. It felt different, lighter somehow. But Claire had said the gate comes down, and I had learned she never used words casually. Around 9, a county truck rolled in, followed by a survey crew and 2 utility workers. No sirens, no drama, just paperwork becoming reality. They walked to the subdivision entrance where Willow Ridge's ornamental access gate had stood controlling traffic between the development and county road. The same gate Denise once threatened to use as leverage over emergency access routes. Homeowners gathered along sidewalks in golf shirts and slippers, watching in silence while county workers unlocked the control box, disconnected the private access mechanism, and swung the barrier permanently open under administrative order. I heard the hinges groan in the morning air, and it sounded almost ceremonial. The gate Denise used as a symbol of control had become a public easement access point. Open. Unowned. I looked at Claire, and she simply said, "There it is. The gate comes down. Plant. Payoff." A whole philosophy in 6 words. But the deeper justice came an hour later. Temporary administrators held a neighborhood meeting on the clubhouse lawn, folding chairs in neat rows. Coffee urns steaming beside a registration table. Residents learned the private assessments Denise had used to pressure people were suspended. Fraud review ongoing. Illegal liens voided. Community governance under independent oversight. You could feel fear leaving people in real time, like pressure bleeding from a cracked pipe. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact walked up to shake my hand. One man laughed and said he never thought refusing an HOA could become a master class in constitutional boundaries. Even Claire smiled at that. Then Denise arrived, not in command, not flanked by board members. Alone. No clipboard. No performance. Just a woman walking through consequences she built herself. She paused when she saw the open gate, and for a long moment said nothing. Wind stirred oak leaves overhead. Somewhere a dog barked. She finally looked at Claire and asked quietly why we did not fight her sooner. Claire answered with the cold wisdom I had heard in fragments for months. Because loud justice scares people. Patient justice exposes them. Denise lowered her eyes. There was no triumph in the moment. Only truth settling. She turned and walked back toward her car past residents who no longer parted for her. The suburban kingdom had dissolved without a raised voice. That afternoon, I drove our ranch road alone, windows down, smelling cut grass and sun-warmed cedar, and stopped where the false boundary marker had once been moved. Survey pin sat restored exactly where my grandfather's line always ran. Promises written into dirt. My father would have liked that. At sunset, Claire and I sat on the porch with coffee while the open subdivision gate glinted in the distance. No private guard. No HOA patrol. Just a road. She rested the closed red file on the table between us and tapped it once. "Bullies borrow power," she said. "Real power signs warrants." I laughed because after everything, that was the whole story. Denise called the law believing she owned it. She ended up introducing it to my wife. And the part one think about most is this. Justice did not arrive with shouting. It arrived through paperwork, patience, and one federal badge catching patrol lights at the right moment. People think power is the person making demands at the gate. They are wrong. Power is the one who quietly opens it.